Thanks for joining us, everybody, on the Bret Boone podcast. I'm Rich Herrera from the Infinity Sports Network, joined by Tyler Kepner, New York Times bestselling author from The Athletic, and, of course, Bret Boone. As we get ready to begin our podcast today, we're shocked with the breaking news, the passing of the hit king, Pete Rose. His agent has confirmed TMZ with the early reports that Pete has passed away at the age of 83. All three of us have met Pete, spent time with Pete. Bret, you knew him as a little kid. We'll start with you. Reaction to the passing of the hit king.
Wow, I mean, we literally just heard this news comes down. Pete, wow, I've got so many memories, and like you mentioned, most of them are from my childhood. The way I grew up and the life as a kid that I had, that I deemed to be, that was my life. It was normal. Going to the ballpark every day is what I did. Like my buddies went to their dad to work with their fathers. That's what I did with my dad. And I was never that kid that had a favorite player. You know, I always said, oh, my dad. But my favorite players were always whoever I was hanging out with that day. You know, Bull was my favorite player. Schmitty was my favorite player. Man, but Pete, yeah, this is weird because it just happened. When it's all said and done, and I get to my adulthood and I watch the game, if you had to ask me today, who's your favorite player? He's an unbelievable personality, like no one I've ever met. But how he played the game on the field, I would have to say Pete Rose is the epitome. And I'd have to say was my favorite player out of all the guys. It's just weird, you know, as we all, you get to a point in life where you start to lose older friends, and it becomes a part of your life. And of course, one day, Pete Rose is going to die. We just recently had him on the podcast, and I believe he was 83 years old. But then you hear it, and it's just it kind of hits you like it's hitting me right now. I've got so many memories as a kid growing up with him, staying the night at his house, stayed the night at his house the night they won the World Series. You know, I was friends with his son, Petey, who, if Petey's, watching this, my condolences go out. Yeah, it's kind of hitting me a little bit right now, but definitely a big part of my childhood and obviously a huge part of baseball.
We'll go to Tyler next. Tyler, you've covered baseball for so long. Pete is the hit king. He's bigger than life in the game. Your instant reaction to the passing of Pete Rose at the age of 83.
Well, there'll never be a career, never be a life like that. I mean, Pete Rose was an extraordinary American story in all of its complications and triumphs and lows. I mean, nobody rose as high as Pete Rose, and nobody fell as hard, if you think about it. I mean, he had more hits than anybody who ever played the game. He had more games, more at-bats, more wins than anyone who ever played. He loved to play baseball. He willed himself to have any kind of career, let alone a record-setting career. As Bret talked about, the way he played the game rubbed off so positively on so many people who watched him. You know, parents could tell their kids, play like that, hustle all the time, get everything you have out of your ability. And Pete Rose certainly did. The same drive, though, that motivated him to achieve the highest of highs and 3 championships, also drove him, as we know, to gambling and to a lifetime ban, which, as we know now, was never lifted in the course of his life. It was a severe punishment from 1989 until the end, but that was the rule that has been there for well before Pete Rose was born. So it was sad in a way, to see him. The last time I saw him up in Cooperstown a couple months ago, as he always was, signing autographs at a store just a couple of doors down from Cooperstown. He never retreated. He never went into like hiding. He was always out there always in the public eye, always so close, but kind of so far from the game he loved, like wanting to forever be a part of it, but making some missteps, along the way, even after the banishment. So it's a tale of triumph and, in the baseball sense, tragedy, unlike anything we've ever seen.
Again, reacting to the news of the passing of the hit king Pete Rose, dead at the age of 83, TMZ first to report it. It's been confirmed by his agent, who's asking the family's asking for privacy at this time. But all three of us at one point in our careers, Bret as a little kid and as an adult knew Pete. Tyler, you covered Pete Rose in Major League Baseball forever. I was a coworker with Pete. We worked together at Sports Fan Radio Network out of Las Vegas, Nevada. So when I first broke into sports radio, I got a chance to work with Pete and be next to Pete every day. I'll throw this out at the two of you. Pete Rose is about, if people are going to ask me how to describe Pete Rose, I would say that he is the most human of any professional athlete or superstar that I've ever met in my life. He was bigger than life. He was the hit king. He was one of the greatest players to ever lace him up, but he had a human touch to him that made him one of us. He wasn't the biggest, he wasn't the strongest, but he played hard, like you said, Tyler. Dads would tell their kids, hey, run to first like Pete Rose. But just like all humans, he had his flaws as well, and he never shied away from that. And that's what I think made him so relatable, Tyler, is that he was able to achieve this greatness, but he was one of us. He wasn't a gigantic 6'4" Aaron Judge looking guy. He looked like the rest of us, but he just had that something that drove him beyond what any of the rest of us mortals could ever expect to do.
Right. I think that's a big part of his relatability. I mean, in his day, before all the gambling, he was incredibly marketable, incredibly popular. I mean, he had a 44-game hitting streak in 1978, and Jimmy Carter invited him to the White House. He was a national hero. I mean, breaking Ty Cobb's record in 1985 was an enormous event in American sports. I mean, this was a guy who sort of was one of the early pioneers of free agency in terms of shopping himself to the highest bidder, being unapologetic about that, and going to Philadelphia, which had never won a World Series and had all these great players, Bob Boone included, who had gotten close, and they needed that guy to put them over the top. And Pete Rose welcomed that and became that guy and put them over the top. He was a team guy in the sense that he was willing to move all over wherever you wanted to play him. He'd figure it out. He'd figure out the outfield, second base, first base, third base, put him in the lineup somewhere. He'll figure out the defensive part and he'll hit. He had a greed, an athletic greed that you love in terms of it was never enough. 4 hits would have to be 5. It's just, he wanted that mark that meant so much to him. Getting that all-time. And that is one thing that they will never take away from him. They took away his employment in baseball. They took away the rule that said he could be voted on in the Hall of Fame. He's never even been voted on because they took that away. But they can never take away the hit record, and that meant so much to him. He dies the all-time hit king, and it's a hell of a legacy.
Exactly. Bret, now that I've given you a couple of minutes to process this, again, you knew him as a little kid. You knew him as an adult. You knew him as a friend of your dad. You knew him as a friend of yours. Tell me about Pete, the person. And Tyler's great story when he came on the podcast. He told us that Bret went over to his house the year the Phillies won the World Series. His mom and dad went out for the celebration. Pete Rose took Pete Jr. and Bret back to his house. They spent the night, and then they got up the next morning. And, Bret, he used to call you a mullion. He called me a mullion. Tyler, I don't know if he ever called you mullion, but he would call us mullions. And it was this kind of his wink, wink, nudge, nudge way of saying, okay, you're okay, guy. You're one of us. And Bret, he would make you feel like you were important, and you're talking to baseball immortality.
Yeah. There's been a few people that have been in my life and touched my life through baseball that you hear it. I mean, it's probably an overused term, but they broke the mold when they made X. There's been a few of those guys in my life. Lou Piniella being one, Pete Rose being the other. Two that I could think of. Reggie Jackson maybe would be a third. There's just nobody I've ever met like him. Pete was funny, uh, always on to the next thing. The things I remember about Peter, he never had credit cards. He always had a wallet, and he had a wallet, and it was thick. I mean, it was 3 inches thick.
But Brett, it wasn't even a wallet. He had the rubber band from the produce section with
right.
bills wrapped in it. Right? It wasn't even a real wallet. I remember that.
To this day, my kids ask me, Dad, why don't you get a real wallet? You know what kind of wallet I have? I have the Pete Rose wallet. Pete Rose wallet. And I have that because of him at an early age. He was from he said, because when I pay for something, I want to feel it. I don't want to just put a card down and just, you put your credit card down and it's $1,000 and you sign it. And then the credit card bill comes, wait a minute, I forgot I spent that $1,000. He goes, I want you to feel it when you're paying money. He always paid in cash. Tyler mentioned the 5 hits. Oh, he was that one guy. Most of us baseball players, if we get 3 hits in a game or 4 hits in a game, yeah, we always want 5, but we're happy to go home with a 4 for 5. Pete wasn't that way. Pete had to have that 5th. I'll tell you a quick story and then I'll get off it. This is from my dad. My dad said, this is how I sum up Pete Rose. He said, Brett, when he came over to the Phillies, he was going through a real rough divorce. And everything in Philadelphia headlines was Pete Rose and the messy divorce he was going through. And he said, I don't know how he was doing it, Brett. He said, I mean, every single question every day, all day long was about his divorce. And he was having a great year. And he said, so I just casually went up to him one day. I said, Pete, how do you deal with having to play every day, getting this many hits, and your life is all over the front page of the paper every day? And he said, he looked at him and said, Bobby, it's a hell of a lot easier dealing with it when you're 3 for 4 than 0 for 4. And he just didn't miss a beat and kept going. That was Pete. That's what I remember as a kid, getting in his car after the game. And he'd always have a quick one-liner to kind of put you in your place as a little kid. You know, I'm 8, 9, 10 years old. And then we'd go off to whatever he'd do. And he'd start laughing and like I said, always on and just funny. But one thing he loved, it was, oh man, baseball. And I'll always remember him. I've got a lot of fond memories.
And I think he loved people. Tyler, I think that's one of the things. He also loved people, and he was real, whether it was a clubhouse attendance all over baseball or just the members of the media, his teammates, the staff. I remember when he came to work with us, the radio station, I was bouncing off the walls, Tyler, like, Pete, I get to work with Pete Rose. My partner said, listen, if you just go fanboy on him, he's just going to look at you like a fanboy. Just be professional. So I sat there on the couch. I'm reading newspaper. He walks by and he kind of looks at me and I kind of give him a nod. He goes in the control room. I walk back. He walks back out. I'm still sitting in there with the newspaper. He walks by and goes, hey, can you get me something to drink? I'm like, I can't, I'm busy. And he kind of rolls his eyes like, hey, who's this intern not wanting to go get me something? And they go, Rich, 3 minutes. So I jump back in and I run into the studio and I get on the microphone. I'm getting ready to start the next segment. And Pete looks at me and goes, oh, man, I thought you were an intern. I'm sorry, because I was just a kid at the time. And ever since then, he was just nothing but good to me. And he was always so kind. I don't think I ever paid for anything around Pete because he'd pull out that big, it was usually blue or something like that. He got him from the produce section of the grocery store for his wallet. I remember one time his co-host was trying to buy a computer, didn't have credit. They wouldn't let him have it. And Pete just rolled off some dough and said, here, go get your computer. You pay me back whenever you want. I remember Pete showing up at the radio station one day and he was signing Bugs Bunny lithographs of a Cincinnati Red uniform with Bugs Bunny. And I walked by and I laughed. I go, what are you doing that for? And he goes, because of this. And he was just a genuinely nice person. And when we had him on, Tyler, it almost seemed like, Brett, I don't know if you felt this. I kind of felt like he was saying goodbye to us. And that's where I want to go next with you, Tyler. He said, I'm not going to get into Cooperstown until after I'm dead. Well, Pete passes away today. Does Pete ever get his rightful place in Cooperstown now that he's gone? Is this punishment enough that he's not going to be able to see himself go into Cooperstown? But you can't tell the story without Pete Rose of the history of baseball.
No, you can't. And his stuff is all over the museum for sure. I've always felt that, look, Pete made his own bed, in terms of the banishment from baseball, but I always felt that the Hall of Fame banishment was a step too far, and it was borderline cruel in the sense that, when he was banned from baseball in 1989, there was no rule saying that if you were banned from baseball, you were in the Hall of Fame. There wasn't a rule. Shoeless Joe Jackson had never made it into the Hall of Fame, but he was at least, voted on and considered. But right before Pete Rose was to be eligible for the first time for the writer's ballot, the Hall of Fame board saw this and put through a rule that said if you are on the ineligible list for baseball, you are also ineligible to be considered for the Hall of Fame. And the writers never had a chance to vote for him. He's never been on a Veterans Committee ballot. And to me, I just think he should have had that fair trial. You know what I mean? Hey, if the writers or whoever, the Veterans Committee, would think that he violated the sportsmanship standards, okay, then they've spoken, but nobody got to weigh in on it, and that's a shame.
Bret, a friend of mine just sent me a text. What happens first? This is the question you always ask. Does Pete get through the pearly gates of heaven first, or does he get into Cooperstown first? Well, now we know he's never going to see himself with his plaque inside Cooperstown. Is it time?
Man, and it's such. I've been wrestling with this for a long time, because I said, probably push comes to shove, I've got to pick a favorite player. It's Pete Rose, and it's what he did on the field and how he played the game, how he went about it. He did everything on the field right, and I think he didn't do everything off the field right, but none of us do. That being said, that's the top one that we all know as baseball players. You don't bet on baseball when you are uniformed personnel. And I've wrestled with it, and I've wrestled with it. I still haven't come to my conclusion on Pete and the Hall of Fame because of that golden rule. And it's at the top of every clubhouse still, I believe, to this day, when you walk through the front door. And I don't have an answer for you, because on one hand, the memories, the relationship I had with him, the respect I had for his between the lines. On the other hand, it's like, that's kind of the one thing. So I don't know. I think it's going to happen eventually. I think at this point, yeah, I think Tyler made a good point. At least get him in front of, let him have a vote. Doesn't matter what I think or any individual thinks that played the game, but the collective. What is the collective think? What is the Veterans Committee think? Because that's a part of the collective of his peers. I think that's the fair way to go about it going forward.
Tyler, let me ask you this, and we'll end our talk about Pete right here. You talk about the punishment, capricious, over the top. If you think about it, we've had people punished for doing things in sports, but could you ever think of a more severe punishment that would hurt someone to the core than taking the game away from Pete Rose because the game meant so much to him? I can't think of another player that banishment would be a crueler punishment than what Pete has had to go through since he was banned from baseball. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and unfortunately, it really does, though, underscore the severity of that action. As Bret said, every player knows that that's the rule, that you cannot bet on baseball as a uniformed, member of a team, manager, whatever. And if anything dramatically underscored that, it was the banishment of the all-time hit king, the guy who played more games than anybody and loved every second of it, said he'd walk through hell in a gasoline suit to play baseball, was banned from baseball for violating that rule. Now, you could say, would it be just as effective a deterrent if the rule was a 30-year to life ban or something to really end someone's, career, employment? Yeah, I think it probably would be as effective, and Pete could have gotten back in an advisory role when he was an old man at 80 years old or something, but he never could. because lifetime means lifetime. And, that if anyone ever doubted this, there's no need to doubt that anymore.
For me, again, all three of us have met him. All three of us spent time. Obviously, you guys more than I, but I don't think there's anybody in the game of baseball that's ever laced him up that loved the game as much as Pete. And a lifetime banishment hurt more down to the core of who you are. That Pete walked around all these years in the face of the earth, not being around the game that he was so synonymous with. So, again, our condolences to the Rose family, to Pete Jr., to everybody with the Cincinnati Reds, Philadelphia Phillies, Montreal Expos, organizations and teams. Pete Rose dead at the age of 83.